Hello, and welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast, where you'll hear from thought leaders all around the world in a wave of goodness and progress well underway that almost no one knows about. In this podcast, we'll introduce you to people who are fundamentally paving the way for a better world for us all. And they will give you hope for the future, many practical ways you can use to handle life's ups and downs because these thought leaders have faced them. But mostly, they're going to give you insights every week that help you make a leap or two of your own. So I'm Dr. Linda Ulrich, founder of Ever Widening Circles, where since 2014, we have been writing thousands of articles and giving people thousands of links to goodness and progress, to an amazing array of things that are happening in the world that are not getting the coverage, going completely uncelebrated. So here we've been talking to thought leaders like that are in that wave, and we're sharing those conversations with you now. So today I'm going to speak with Jordan Schwartz. Jordan was the founder of a company that did event. He's going to have to tell us a little bit more event and trade show work right for 13 years before the pandemic hit. And he has an amazing story of how business can flourish by solving problems with a focus on team culture. It's really an insightful journey for us all that he's been on. And he uses a philosophy he calls Hive Mind. He has for many years. So he's going to share that with us too. And this is probably the secret of his success through this rough patch in history. So Jordan, welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, Jordan and I had a crazy phone call when I was speeding 80 miles an hour down the highway between Illinois and Vermont a couple of weeks ago. And I have thought about you about 100 times since then. There's so many things that we talked about in that conversation that seem obvious now as strategies, but you've been on a heck of a journey.
I have. I mean, I'm not quite sure where to start with it. I mean, just a little background on the kind of the most recent piece of the journey. So, as you mentioned, my company built apps for conferences and trade shows, and we've been doing it about 13 years, and was a mildly successful business, but wasn't all that I wanted it to be. And when COVID hit, we had this existential crisis, right? I mean, if you're imagine serving conferences and trade shows where people get together when the pandemic hit, every one of our contracts was gone. Every one of our customers disappeared overnight. And, I thought about just kind of wrapping up the show and, returning whatever money we had in the bank and kind of riding off into the sunset. But we got together as a team and we kind of did some brainstorming, and we were able to make a fast pivot into serving virtual events. So we took some streaming technology like Zoom and things like that and melded it into this experience that we had already built and allowed these trade shows to go on to continue as virtual events. And so people would go to the website and use the app to watch the conferences and to meet with other people and do all the things that they couldn't do in person anymore. And it was a big success. I mean, we went from a 20-person company to a 150-person company in just a few months. And it was because there were so many companies out there that relied on putting these events on. I mean, it was their membership needed to meet with each other. They needed the certifications, things like that. And so it was an incredibly exciting time. And I mean, I felt good both about, having this kind of successful business, but also being able to provide jobs for all these people in the event industry that were suddenly had been unmoored by the pandemic,
and also, right? Your company grew.
Right, we grew from 20 people to, like I was saying, I mean, 150 or so in just a few short months. And there were people who spoke the language of the event industry, who could walk the walk. They understood what was in the hearts of the people who were putting on the events, because they already had that experience. And we were able to just kind of load them into this new way of doing things and help everyone out. But you were talking before about the idea of the hive mind, and how I think how we were able to be successful. And so if I kind of wind the story back a little bit,
Yes.
Maybe 25 years ago, something like that, I was in graduate school for psychology. And I read an article in the Whole Earth Review by Kevin Kelly. He actually went on to found Wired magazine and kind of has a whole illustrious life after that. But at the time, he wrote this article about the hive mind. And what it explained was the notion that a colony of individuals acting according to a very simple rule set can manifest an intelligence. So just like your neurons in your brain, none of them think, none of them are individually intelligent, but they are connected and they pass signals back and forth according to this kind of simple rules, neurotransmitters, electrical signals, and the reinforcement happens and it creates your mind. And you can think of a beehive or an ant colony or any kind of colony like that as doing the same thing. So ant colonies and beehives, they can solve problems, they can learn. An ant colony can distinguish between two sources of food and decide which one is better, even though no individual ant ever visits both sources. Wow. Beehives will learn where the good sources of honey are, or pollen or nectar, and will teach. The whole will learn it. And I just thought that was such a cool idea. And so I got beehives because I wanted to see it in action. And that was just an enormously rewarding experience. I kind of sit outside the hives and watch them come and go. And you learn that it's a very complex interaction they have with, I tend to think of bees as they fly, they get the nectar, they go back to the hive, but in fact they have guard bees that kind of sit at the front of the beehive and will frisk the workers coming in from the field, make sure that they're allowed in and pass them in. They'll kind of frisk them with their antennae. And
there's the waggle dance.
The waggle dance, exactly. When one finds a honey source, that bee will come back and do a little dance, and it's based on the position of the sun and some other things like that. And the other bees can watch that, and then they'll go and visit the same source. And if they like it, they'll come back and they'll do the same dance, and it gets reinforced. And then all the bees are doing the same dance. And the hive has learned where this honey source is, or the nectar source, the pollen source. And they'll do things like if they're too short on one particular role, so they have nurses and guards and workers who harvest in the field. If there aren't enough of a particular role, they'll just shift roles. And there's nobody telling them what to do. I mean, we have this idea of a queen, but the queen is kind of the genetic mother of the hive, but she's not issuing orders. It's not like, all right, you're going to be a worker now. You're going to go be a guard. It's an emergent property of the hive that it learns how to behave. And something that when we were talking last week really kind of clicked in my brain and crystallized something that I've been thinking about for a while. You were talking about biomimicry, and I don't know if you want to. Do you have a definition of that you want to provide?
Yeah. So one of the many things you and I connected on, I have bees too. I'm not sure I told you that, but
oh no, I don't think you did.
Yes, we have 4 different hives. There's the really nice hive and the 3 crabby ones. Oh, we could go on. So biomimicry is one of these fields that we are very, very interested in at Ever Widening Circles, because it so much speaks to our future. Maybe someplace that we have to go as a last resort when we've tried everything else. But biomimicry is a field of engineering and design that looks at nature to solve human problems. So you could, the best story about what biomimicry is for ordinary folks like me is that the bullet train. The bullet train was going so fast and it was shaped in such a way that it created a sonic boom. And that was, of course, disruptive to all the communities that it went through. So they had to fix this problem. And one thing led to another, and they discovered that the end of a kingfisher's nose is shaped in such a way that if we shaped the front of the bullet train like that, there would be no sonic boom. And so the bullet train is a classic example. If you look at a picture of the bullet train and a kingfisher, you're going to say, oh, that's the source. So one of the things that we love about the whole concept of biomimicry at Ever Winding Circles, it's such a holistic way of looking at problem solving. It really does take into account 3.8 billion years of R&D that Mother Nature has done to get things right. And I think that that's what you're doing when you're talking about this hive mind that we can use, this self-organization, this way that if we have a shared purpose, then we'll all find our role in getting there.
Right.
So please, you go. What's your definition of
Yeah,
biomimicry?
that's exactly where I was going with it. That in the example, so after we spoke, I went and I did kind of watch some TED Talks and such on biomimicry, and they mostly took this engineering perspective, like the bullet train example, and
Right.
using the way that dolphin skin is built to build more efficient swimsuits and things like that.
Yes.
But it seems like the same principles can apply to more psychological or kind of metaphorical uses. And so when I was a kid, I used to read a ton of science fiction. And I would kind of lie in bed at night having these kind of 13-year-old big thoughts, right? And, I think, what would it be like if an alien intelligence tried to talk to us? Like, would we be able to communicate with it if it thought so fundamentally different? And I think about the hive mind is essentially when we try to communicate with a hive of bees, it's exactly what we're doing. And I'm not going to go up to a beehive and say, hello, my name's Jordan. I'm software, but I can say to it, I mean you no harm.
Right.
And I communicate that to it by the way that I walk and the way that I interact with it, and I kind of the way I impinge on its senses. And it can learn that I am not a threat to it. And so if you think about the different colonies that we have in our lives, it's, there's a very small level, our family might be a small colony, right? And it has its own interactions. Or my company was a colony, right? It had all these people working together, having their interactions and reinforcing ideas and passing ideas around. And other companies that we worked with were countries. I mean, everything. You can think of all these different levels of, or different units of a hive, of a colony, that each will have their own personality. And you said when you were talking about your hives, you said what, one of them, two of them are nice and one's grumpy.
Yes, one is really nice. You can lawnmower around it. I can even lay with my head about 1 foot from it. I like to do what I call sitting with bees. But the other two, Chuck gets one pass on the lawnmower, and they will chase him. If he tries to make a second, they'll find him 100 yards away.
Right.
They're
so
crabby.
your hives actually have a different personality.
Yes, they do.
They have different minds. And so, when I was building my company, we grew incredibly rapidly, right? Again, I said we went from 20 to 150 people in a very short period of time. That was way more than certainly I could have taught everyone what to do. I mean, I was
Right.
dealing with that growth, and there were just more people than I could kind of uniquely interact with and train and things like that. But I was very lucky in that the people that we had a good personality. We had a good personality,
Yes.
right?
That is so great. I just want to pause there for a minute and reinforce that is that a culture, like when we look at business culture, we all have notions about what that is. Here's how you eat lunch. Here's how where you park. Here's you never violate that parking spot, you know, or this is how we give feedback or this is how we receive feedback. There's those parts of a culture, but what you're talking about is something much bigger and more closer to our individual hearts, I think.
Yeah, yeah. The what happened in our company as the new people came on board is that the the previous employees and the people who'd been there for years they were fantastic about kind of welcoming everyone, creating a culture um, of of helping. I'm
Yeah,
kind of
I know.
lack a better word for it, but there was, we knew that everybody was new, and so we established this norm early on of ask questions. We're no one is expecting you to know things yet. Everybody is new here. Almost everyone was new,
Yeah.
right? And so people ask questions. Is how do I do this? And that first class of people, right? The first wave of people very quickly became the veterans, and I think they had internalized that culture of
Of helping.
helping.
I
And so
love
when the next wave of people came in, they pass it on. Like, this is the way we do things here. I'm going to do what I was shown, which is, offer to help. Like, oh, it looks like you're struggling a little bit. Do you understand that? Do you want me to spend a little time showing you how to do it? And then that became the dominant pattern in in the mind.
Yeah, we were kind of stumbling around there for a better word than helpers, but I tell you, I think that's where we're going as a culture. I've been saying, I think that, every day people tell me they're turning off the news and they're disconnecting from social media because there's not enough helpers there. There's not enough thoughtful people who are measured, who think about what they're saying before they start tapping away. And I think in this kind of times, it was Mr. Rogers who used to say that his mother would say in tough times, look for the helpers. And if you created a culture like that, intentionally or accidentally, but I do think it probably comes back to your character, Jordan. I know you're a modest guy, so you're not
Mhm.
going to admit that. But there was something about your way that taught the first employee, that taught the second, that taught the third. Give us now. That's important part of your story that I want not to skip over. Is that you worked for 10 years at Microsoft, a big culture, and then started your own business. What, 13 years ago? What was it?
Yeah, yeah, I did about 13 years ago. That's right.
And what I remember about your story was you started it kind of conventionally in that first year, but then now this was 12 years ago. You went to a pretty much virtual workplace.
Yeah,
12 years ago. I can't even
right.
imagine what that was. So tell us about that transition and why you made those decisions, and then how you went from one employee to another with this virtual culture and problem solving through thinking about relationships. Because another thing I remember you telling me is that you've been home every day of your 12-year-old son's life.
Yeah, yeah, and so the reasoning behind going pure remote was twofold. I mean, number one, um, I right around that same time. So I started the company 13 years ago, and I have a 12-year-old son, and being there, uh, I didn't want to. I didn't want to go to the office at 8 o'clock in the morning and come home at 7 o'clock at night and have an exhausted dinner and then repeat it the next day. I wanted I wanted to be there with him. I wanted to have a relationship with him as he grew up. And so being able to work from home was the way to do that. It also meant, as a small growing business, that we weren't limited to people who lived within walking or driving distance from where we happened to place our office. We had the world. And so we had employees from the very beginning. We had employees in Spain and Romania and Brazil and all over the world. We could choose the best. Our talent pool was as large as it gets, right?
Yeah.
But the challenge, especially when you start to cross time zones, is how do you create a culture? I want to distinguish this. This wasn't a case of we hired a company somewhere to develop our software for us and wrote up the specifications and sent it off to them. We used, originally it was Campfire, which was a predecessor to Slack. It was before Slack existed, and but it was a chat room, and we would be in it every day, and eventually we moved to Slack. And I was very deliberate about the kinds of enforcing and encouraging the kinds of interactions that I wanted us to have that would create a culture. So often what would happen, especially with new people, is they would join the team and they would have some question. And well, who's going to know the answer to this question better than the guy who started the company? Okay. So, and I don't want to look like an idiot. So I'm just going to ask, I'm going to ask Jordan. I'll ask that one guy what the answer is, and he'll tell me. And then no one else will know that I didn't know the answer, and I get my answer quickly. And it became a joke about when they realized that I refused to answer. I would say, "Can you ask this again in one of the public chat rooms?" Because I wanted everyone to see. I wanted everyone to participate together. And part of it was mechanical. I knew that if this person had the question, odds were that 3 other people might have the question as well, and they could see the answer, and I could save myself time by answering the question once instead of 3 or 4 times. But I also knew that if they were to know each other, if they were going to trust each other, if they were going to build relationships with each other, they had to see each other. They had to see each other. I mean, eventually visually, once we adopted Zoom, but just they had to see each other talk and have those moments of, they're not asking me a question, but I can see them asking someone else a question. I start to get a sense of their personality. I can start to anticipate what they're going to know and what they're not going to know, where they're going to need help. And that, I think that ended up being instrumental to creating this culture of helping.
Yeah.
Because someone would ask a question in the public channel, and it became the norm. You see a question, right? You answer it, because that's what happened to you when you asked a question. Mm-hmm. And so I think, if you go kind of back to this idea of biomimicry and using the idea of a hive mind as this metaphor for understanding the organization and the interactions, you can think about, your neurons. They have these neurotransmitters, and that's, then dendrites and axons, whatever this is the way they talk to each other. And you need to have a healthy flow of information between as many nodes as possible, so that those healthy patterns get reinforced, so that information flows, so that information gets replicated, so that if you end up losing a particular neuron, it doesn't matter, right? It's all part of the whole. And so I think that exact same thing applies to organizations, both a company like mine, but a neighborhood, a country, any group.
I absolutely love this way of thinking. So one of the things, you see me writing from time to time, I don't like to interrupt. I love my guests to just flow in the conversation. But I wrote down about 5 things while you were talking there. Okay. So the first one I've noticed is that by doing that, what you did with not answering questions and having people bring it to the group is that you made everybody involved in the success of everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and I mean, they did it because they cared about each other.
Yeah.
You know, I think we often will try to reduce people's behaviors to something that is ultimately self-serving.
Yeah.
We'll talk about, well, if you help other people, it makes it more likely that they'll help you. And that's why people do it.
Oh, right.
And I don't know, maybe it's true, but I prefer to think that people help each other because they want to, and okay,
Me
because it makes them
too.
feel good. Fine,
Me too.
I'll give you that.
I
Um,
do.
and so yeah, we created a culture where it was kind of normative and expected and fulfilling and rewarding to help other people. And so you could see, as I mean, when you answer somebody's question, they go, "Thank you."
I
Like, just
know. Great.
a little, there's a little dopamine kick.
Okay, but something that's true in this culture you created, I think, is that you managed to make raising your hand. Okay, so I have a daughter who's very, she's our CEO for Ever Winding Circles, and she has done a lot of work in in education related to the message that we're trying to get out there. And she was talking to this very high level thought leader one day about education, and this gal informed her that kids don't raise their hand in class anymore. Did you
Hmm.
know it's not good? I mean, there are kids that raise their hand in class, of course, but there's now a culture of raising your hand in class is considered a vulnerability. Like you don't want to admit you don't know something has become way more important than it used to be when we were kids.
Hmm.
So, with that in mind, I think that translates into the workplace where we don't want to show our vulnerabilities. I think what you've done is create a culture where that's very invested in preserving other people's dignity. Like that's probably a foundation down there is that you're it's okay for the smartest, longest employee to still ask a question.
Right.
It's okay for the new person to ask a question and nobody answers it in some snarky way. You just answer it to be helpful, and everybody's dignity is preserved, and the knowledge base. Give me a break. The institutional knowledge has got to be like a rising tide that raises all the boats up.
Right. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That um, it was important and rewarding for people to help each other. Um, we didn't have any kind of, there was no point system for helping
Right.
somebody, right? Um, but I think people, it was recognized, and when I mean, we all knew who would always jump in, and who you could count on to come up with an answer that went beyond just here's the answer. But
Yeah.
do you want to jump on a quick Zoom call, and we can talk to
Right.
each other? Um, and I think, I mean, you kind of hit on a point about the vulnerability
Uh-huh.
that comes with needing help.
Right.
Um, and so, just as we needed to normalize helping each other, we also had to normalize asking for help, and making that socially acceptable. Um, and it just, I think we were lucky in a way, and it was so easily explainable. I mean, everybody, 80% of the company had been there for less than 4 months at some point.
Right.
And so, when people say, "Oh, I don't know what's going on," nobody does. It's fine. You're all, "Oh, that's right. You've only been here 2 months. Okay, great. You've been here 2 months and you already seem to know more than me. So I have hope that I'll get there quickly."
Exactly. So we're going to go to a break now, just a quick break. And I think what we're talking about ties into what people are going to hear in the break. Here at Ever Widening Circles, we recognized that in this culture of people doing good in the world, creating businesses that had something to do with the greater good, um, we recognized that everybody in that sphere was just little tiny points of light out there shouting into the darkness that they were here, that they had something that could be super helpful to others. And if we all stayed in our own little spaces all alone, we were never going to combat this this negative tidal wave that is going on. So we started something called the Conspiracy of Goodness Network. That's sort of like a social network combined with a personal development network, where people who are wanting to see a better world can come together and be multipliers for each other's goodness, to swap solutions and exchange all kinds of collaborations. So anyway, let's go to that break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about your journey a little bit more. Okay, we're back. And Jordan, where we left off was we were talking about this system that you had created, this culture that you had created around relationships. And that's something I'd like you to talk a little bit more about, because what happened to everyone when the pandemic hit, for one thing, I think it was a leveling. It was the great leveling throughout society. There was nobody who was immune to COVID. There were no business leaders who could tell the future. Not one person, no matter how lofty their position was. So we were all in the flow of a great unknown together. And so a lot of the things that you already had in place were all you had to bring to the table to solve the problem, to get through that first 2 months. And you told me that you were right on the edge of disaster. Now, did your employees sort of self-organize to save things? Was it you that said, "Hey, we already have you guys are already invested in online culture or virtual workplace for 12 years. You obviously were way ahead of everybody who was going to brick and mortar businesses." So, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would say it wasn't an emergent thought. I mean, I kind of trace back the moment that I was kind of sitting alone in front of my
Yeah.
computer and thinking about, what do I do? And sort of kind of threw out this idea of switching to virtual events. But as soon as I did, the network was in place, and the relationships were in place that everyone could self-mobilize on what to do. So, okay, the development team kind of understood, okay, this is where we're trying to go. We got it. Talk to you in a few weeks. The client support team understood, okay, we're gonna have to start shifting. We're gonna have to start building up new documentation and changing our patterns for supporting clients. I mean, supporting a client where they're on site and you've produced an app that everyone installs and then you're done and you move on is very different than a live event where you're the infrastructure for all of the live streams and things like that. It's just a very different requirement. And of course, the sales team and marketing needed to adapt their explanation of what they do to this new way of doing things, and everybody kind of fed off everyone else. I mean, again, we used the relationships to feed the information back and forth. And it's worth noting too that this idea of relationships had always been intrinsic to what we were doing. So, like I said earlier, our original business was apps for conferences. We produced these trade show app, and you could see the agenda and download a map. But there were a lot of them. We had a lot of competitors. They're all doing basically the same thing. It's a little bit of a commodity business.
Yeah.
But what made our solution different, kind of when we said our unique value proposition was relationships. That not only was it an app where you would look and you would see the map and you would see the different talks, but you could use the whole site beforehand to see who else was going to be there, to find people that you wanted to interact with, set up meetings with them, because we believe that that humans are social animals. This goes back, like I said, when I was reading Kevin Kelly's Hive Mind article, I was in social psychology. I was in graduate school for social psychology. And I don't know if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
yes.
right? It's this idea that you kind of think of this pyramid, its base of what everybody needs is, you know, food and shelter and kind of that their basic physical needs met. But right after their physical needs are met, the thing that comes next is social needs, right? You need fulfillment, you need relationships, you need love. And so as a company, we recognize that in our product, that if we were going to provide something that went beyond what the other companies were providing, it needed to meet that need. And I think we did it internally as well.
So it was the whole, I mean, back to the hive mind, right?
Right.
So you said it yourself. There wasn't some moment that you said, okay, team, we're going to go do this. The next purpose evolved. And that's what we have a great interview. If people want to look back in our archives, not very far, there's an amazing interview with Dr. Tamsin Woolley Barker, who's an evolutionary biologist who studies bees and ant colonies and teaches the insights to businesses all around the world, big businesses. She has customers that are enormous, globally known corporations. And they're looking at this hive mind way of thinking about how humans will do better. I want to run a concept that she ran by me and I haven't stopped thinking about by you and see if you observe this in your own experience. So she reminded us that you and I, anybody who's a business owner, will go out and work very hard to hire the most creative self-starter we can possibly find. I mean, that's what we're looking for, right? We don't want anybody we have to micromanage. So then we work all this way, we hire the person, and then we say, here's the system you're going to work in. And the system is all, already there. And the very thing we hired them for, their self-starterness, their creativity and all that stuff goes unused because we just plop them down in a system that somebody else invented maybe 15 years ago. And so she reminds us that what we should be doing as leaders is creating a place where people can self-organize. And she has some really, really creating, systems that are not, this is how we do it, but this is the intention that we bring to it, which is kind of what you did. I think without realizing it, you provided the culture, the flourishing situation, and then people to solve this huge problem of our businesses gone. Right. I bet you didn't have to create the whole systems; they did it themselves.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean I would say every piece of it was certainly more than any individual could do.
Right.
And I talked before about how the different teams deployed themselves and acted autonomously to create what we ended up creating. And it both pre-COVID and post-COVID, it was certainly more than I did, right? It was, you're right, it was hiring good people who were creative and self-starters. I mean, when hiring in a pure remote workplace is a challenge, right? I don't get to interview people. I can't ask people to come in for 3 or 4 interviews and then I take them out to lunch and things like that. I mean, all the things that you would normally do to hire somebody, you can't do it. And also, I mentioned the global talent pool. So when we would post a job, I mean, we're posting it to the world, and we get hundreds of applications, and I don't know, I looked at a resume and everyone looks the same. So what we did is I would ask people to record a short video of themselves, and it could be, 3 to 5 minutes, just explaining something that, tell me how they do something that they're passionate about. So, if I were providing a video, I would say, here's how you hive here's how you take bees and you create a new hive out of them. And the thinking was, you learn a lot from people when you listen to them talk. And I didn't want to ask them a question about events or technology, because I don't care if they know about events yet. The smart, creative people, they'll figure out a new domain quickly. That's not the important part. But having somebody that had something that they were passionate about. I mean, if you can't come up with something that you've learned that you're excited to teach somebody else, that's just not the right fit for us, right? I mean, that's who you look for, is the people who, could be gardening, it could be beekeeping, it could be sailing, it could, running, whatever it is. I want someone who's going to geek out on whatever it is that they're passionate about. And then, of course, part of it is, can they take this highly specialized knowledge and translate it into words that someone who is not specialized can understand? And but that was an invaluable tool to find interesting people, and also it was fun for me, right? I got 50 short snippets where everyone's given their own little, 3-minute TED talk on something that they're passionate about, and I just get to sit there and watch them all.
I think that is genius. I hope everyone listening to this podcast remembers that and offers it as a part of the solution, because people are working from well, I've seen statistics where a good 70% who are working from home, who suddenly went from to online work, will stay that way when this whole thing blows over, and that's a lot.
And I want to mention too that the video piece of that was critical. So you look at somebody's resume and you've got these words on the page, but being able to see them, and there's problems intrinsic in it too, right? I mean, we all have unconscious biases, and if you're kind of somebody's race and gender and things like that, it can kind of influence. And so I think it's important to be cognizant of that, and control it to the extent that you can, and be aware of it. But when COVID hit, we had been using Zoom for our sales calls and our support calls for years.
Okay.
But we never turned the camera on.
Oh, I love this part. You and I had this talk. Talk about this. This is so fascinating. Please carry on.
I think everyone always felt that it was intrusive maybe to turn on your camera. And I know that the sales team, when I first told them, okay, everyone, cameras on from now on, because if we're going into the virtual event business and we're going to tout that, Zoom like technology can be a replacement for an in-person trade show, we gotta walk the walk. We do it. And I remember my sales team was like, but I'm working out of my basement. And, Jonathan would have his Costco things of toilet paper on the shelf behind him, whatever. And he'd be like, what, are they going to think that we're not professional because we're working from home? And at the time, it was like, you know what, we're all in this together, right? So, but the amazing thing was that when we turned on the cameras for that first time, and I started talking to clients that I had known for years, there was this magic moment of delight, of like seeing each other for the first time. And I remember there's almost like a giggle of like, oh, hey, you. It's nice to meet you, and the relationships that we established were just more meaningful. I would have conversations with people prior to that where you could only hear them, and it's you do your song and dance, and it's all quiet. are they still in the room? Are they
Mhm.
frowning? Are they bored? Are they excited? But once the camera went on, you just get so much more feedback, and you could see that the crinkle in their brow when you said something wrong. Oh, did I? Looks like you're worried about that, or the
Right.
look of boredom, or the look of the lean in moment where you're like, ooh, I got him. This is something that we can spend more time on. But I just felt like I knew them. I mean, we've got
Mhm.
millions of years of evolution that have gone into letting us read each other's faces, right? That just it's more than just the smile and the frown. I mean, there's so much you can tell from somebody. I guess from a utilitarian perspective, there's so much you can tell from someone by looking at them while you talk to them and being able for them to look at you. But just, I guess, it's back to this idea of relationships. And I just feel like I know somebody. I mean, I feel like I know you
I know,
because
but you know
we
what's
see each other.
funny? And I feel like in our car ride when you and I had that long talk while I was speeding along from
Right,
various time zones,
right.
we couldn't. There was something going on that day. It was my internet or yours, probably
You were
mine.
speeding along on
Yeah,
the
yeah. And
in the
so
passenger seat,
yes, that's
but
right. But remember, we had to turn the video off because
yeah,
it wasn't keeping up, and
yeah,
our conversation wasn't nearly as animated as this one,
yeah,
because I keep leaning forward and going, "Oh my gosh, you're blowing my mind." And you can see that without me. My
right,
podcast producers are very big about me not muddying the sound quality by talking over you or interrupting. But you can see my reaction, and that makes it fun.
right, right.
That makes it fun. So there's a few things I want to add to your observations there. One of the things that I noticed, I'm very focused on finding the things that we all have in common. I like to go the opposite way of society. I like to turn things on their head while everybody else is shouting about what we disagree about. I'm going, but wait a minute over here. And one of the things I noticed right off was that we saw other people's kitchens and guest bedrooms, and
Right.
they looked just like ours.
Right. And it's funny, you mentioned it, I know our support team uh, had as part of they have kind of weekly check-ins where the whole team would come together and they'd have everyone's on Zoom, and you got the Brady Bunch times 12 layout. And they would, as part of each meeting, they would give home tours. And so it was one person each week would pick up their computer and walk around and say, here's my, my uh,
Yes,
my collectibles, and this
yes,
is where I sew, and
right.
oh, don't look in there, there's laundry on the bed. And I think, in the same way that you get to know somebody by looking at them, you get to know somebody by being welcomed into their home.
It is so, so, so true. I remember um I remember the moment I started talking to other people's pets.
Mm,
Because we
right.
have a house full of animals, and we have the funny little voice that we talk to the cat in and all the stuff, and lots of people do. And eventually that just became, someone's cat would hop up on the table or their dog would leap on their lap, that I just started talking to their pets too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a connection.
Yeah. Yeah. And when new people would join my company, we'd have these company meetings every once a week, and again, everybody on Zoom. And the way that I would ask new people to join is I would say, I want you to, everyone, tell your name, where you are physically in the world, what you do for the company, and one silver lining of the COVID pandemic for you. And often you would get, well, I found this job, and that's been great, and I
Yeah.
found this, the people, or I got to spend more time with family, things like that. I think for an interesting silver lining, I hope, for all of us, will be that interacting with people like we are now, having Zoom calls and video calls, has become more normative. That we'll be able to have. We've taught people how to connect across distances. So, you know, everyone says like, we don't want video calls to replace in person. I don't either. But to the extent that my parents live on the other side of the country, and my brothers live on the other side of the country, and I've got friends all over the world. And prior to the epidemic, getting people, teaching them how to use Zoom or whatever was, but now everybody does. Like everybody knows how to get on a video call. It's just part of it. And I hope that will continue, that we'll continue to shrink the world, tighten up relationships that are physically remote when this is all over, and that'll just become a lasting part of our world culture. Because I think that, you know, you get back, we've been talking about my organization and creating this healthy personality, but I mean, I said earlier, the same thing applies to countries. It applies to any group of people. If you can create healthy relationships and patterns, then you can create a healthy personality for that larger group. And I hope that that's what happens.
And we as leaders, it behooves us to if we're going to create anything, create systems that inspire that.
Right.
You know, like you're not answering every single question, creating a system where this was where you, because it does take some intention to do this. This society is so hooked on not looking vulnerable that unless somebody creates those systems with some intention, people are going to still stay in their corners. Yeah, for fear or whatever. You know, something that I also have noticed, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. What I do in my own circles towards that end is I started with myself just to see how it would work. But I started going back to phone calls. I've started really limiting the scope of anything I tap away with my fingers. Because what I noticed this here's how it started. I noticed it between my daughter and I. She's the CEO. She leads everything. She's an amazing, brilliant woman. But we had a lot more friction than I thought we would. And we didn't have a lot of friction in general before we started this business together. And I figured out that when you text somebody a quick message, 3 or 4 sentences, they receive that text in the mood they're in, not the mood you're in. So I might say one sentence that I think can be very brief and very to the point because it's my daughter. But if she's just hung up the phone with somebody who's aggravated or whatever mood she's in, she's going to, well, whatever do you mean by that? You know,
Right.
I don't mean anything. I was just trying to be brief. So I tried so hard to put emojis. That's why we all throw emojis everywhere.
It feels corny, but
yeah, we're trying to imply intention.
Right.
And so I just said, heck, if I have to create an email for somebody with 6 emojis to let them know that I'm smiling all the way through this email, forget it. I'm just picking up the phone.
Yeah.
Or now having a quick Zoom. There's nothing wrong with a 5-minute Zoom.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think there's a desire in business to avoid meetings, right? I'm sure you've seen the memes, you know, if this this meeting could have been an email, right? Yeah. And I get it. I mean, people they need to protect their time. But I think you're right that the flip side of that is when you avoid talking to people, when you avoid having this interactive conversation with them, you lose a lot of context for what's going on. Right. And there's a balance, I think, that you need to hit. And we've come to a place in our culture where calling somebody is considered rude, right? And someone picks up the phone, I'm like, are you crazy? Like, first off, is somebody in the hospital? Because that's the only reason I could think someone would call me without texting me first to say, isn't that you have a moment to chat or something like that, right? But I think I think you're right that it's worthwhile, and we did that at the company as well, where I would, you know, when Slack added the ability to video call somebody, I'd just video call them. And as often as not, they would be tied up and they would just, ask to talk to me later. But I think you're right, that it's valuable that the more frequently you can have interactive conversations where you're talking, you're seeing, short conversations, you have to know when to end them. You create a background of context that then can be used to interpret the text messages that might follow.
Absolutely. I think that's a good trend that I see in how we kind of heal some of the wounds that we've created by this world of just spontaneously tapping out anything and trying to be as brief as possible, where you lost all the context and you catch people in whatever mood they're in. So one of the things that you and I talked about, I think, did we talk about your notions about this thing called the digital nomad?
So this is, we probably did.
I've written it down, and I know that I was writing as fast as I could during that conversation. So tell me about what your thoughts on digital nomads.
Well, part of the value that we got at our company from being a pure remote company was that we were untethered, unbound from physical location. So we realized pretty quickly that if I flip open my laptop and I go to work, and at the end of the day I close my laptop, I don't have to be anywhere in particular. I can as soon be in my home office in Seattle, or I can be in Lisbon or Amsterdam or Thailand, wherever I want to be in the world. And we took advantage of that. In fact, it was kind of one of the selling points when we were hiring people is we would put, be a digital nomad in the job descriptions to attract people who saw that as a value. And we did it a few times. My wife and I rented out our house and spent 3 months traveling in Europe once, and then we did a month a van trip across the Southwest. And I would be back at wherever we had happened to park, tapping on my computer with my phone as the Wi-Fi. My co-founder and business partner did quite a bit of it. He spent 3 months in Vietnam. He spent 3 months in Colombia with his family, and kind of similar thing. And I think what's exciting is that maybe another silver lining of the COVID epidemic is so many companies now that used to require people to come into work have now experimented with remote working and decided that it might work long term, and are allowing employees to work remotely, and seeing it as more than just normal and acceptable, but maybe even desirable. And as that shift happens, it occurs to me that more people who maybe dreamed about living somewhere different for some short time or longer time and experiencing the world will be able to do it. And so I'm, as I think of, so I left the Pathable, the company that I had started in the event space. And as I'm thinking about the future, one of the ideas that I'm playing with is, how do we allow people who are adopting this nomadic lifestyle, for lack of a better word, or long-term travel lifestyle, where they relocate for some extended period of time to somewhere that's exciting to them. How do we allow them to continue to have social experiences? I mean, we talked about it before. We're social animals. We need to connect. My family and I ended up renting an apartment in Lisbon for a month and a half a few years back. Fantastic experience.
While you were running an online business.
Right. Now I would go to. Actually, the time zones worked out great. I'd spend the day with my family, exploring the city or traveling, and then at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, which is 8 o'clock in the morning back in the States somewhere, I would say, okay, I'm going to work, and flip open the laptop and work until there's time to go to sleep. That it was, magic experience. but it was a little lonely
Yeah.
because we're a close family and we love spending time together. But I don't speak Portuguese and I'm living
Yeah.
in Portugal. And how do you connect with people? How do you meet people, either locally or other travelers, whoever it is? And so that's kind of where my thinking is going now, is what kinds of solutions can we come up with for people who are long-term travelers, in or strangers in a strange land, who want to become a part of something, who want to continue to nurture relationships where they are.
Right. I think I would, if you were asking me that question, how do we do this? I often get questions that I'm not sure of the answer is, and I try and work wonder into the answer. So, so for instance, I've always been an early adopter of technology. So about 10 years ago, we were in South Africa with our children, traveling, going to remote places in the Kalahari Desert. We always tried to find Wi-Fi once a day, and the time zone thing worked out just like you. So we had already digital technology in our office 10 years ago. So we could actually check our dental hygiene patients in real time on the internet. So we would spend the morning, it was a 9-hour difference. So we would spend the day doing whatever we wanted to do with the kids. And then we would snuggle up in our beds with our laptops and connect up with the hygienist. And they could stick these intraoral cameras that we had already adopted into patients' mouths who were getting their teeth cleaned. And they could say, John has this breaking tooth, Dr. Linda, take a look at it. What do you think? Is it a regular filling or a crown? And we did that for 14 days. We literally checked all of our patients from South Africa in the United States, by doing exactly. Okay, so the patients didn't have our healing hands on them. We weren't present totally, but this was such a wonder to everyone that the patients thought it was the coolest thing. And so they were full of wonder. The hygienists were full of wonder. Chuck and I were full of wonder. So I think that as we go forward with these technologies, it might be hard to generate wonder for the first digital natives, the generation 21 and younger, because there's no wonder in the internet to them, it just is. But for the rest of us, as we're creating customer experiences, as we're creating internal experiences for our teams, I think it's a good thing to pay attention to the wonder of being able to do lots of the things you and I have talked about today.
Yeah, that I would often use the word delight.
Yes,
That's
delight, great,
what we're trying to do, right?
great.
I think that maybe the way that we originally connected was, we had happiness managers on our team, right? And I think I think somehow that was the original connector. But I think that I like the word wonder, because it has a little bit of curiosity, it has discovery, it has awe, all kind of wrapped up into it.
Yeah, I think I just love the direction this conversation has gone today, Jordan. I hope that everybody leaves this conversation with a bit of awe and wonder and delight, because I think what we've talked about here is a possible view of the future for almost anyone. I love the digital nomad thing, of course, because I'm a global traveler, but I think that you've done things like described how the interview process could be different. You've described how if we really solve problems as we go along with relationships in our business at the foundation, then they are there for us when we need them. Can't suddenly create them during the middle of a pandemic, right? I mean, there's a lot of things for people who are in their working lives and their family lives. I'm gonna re-listen to this podcast interview to write the show notes, and I think I'm gonna enjoy thinking about it through that lens too. Like, what could we think about as families, in even extended families that we learned from the kinds of observations you made. So, thank you so much for joining me.
It has been a great pleasure. I learned a lot as well. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
So Jordan, is there any way, or do you want people to connect with your work somewhere? Or you're kind of in, are you semi-retired right now? Are you in waiting for the next plan to emerge?
Uh, I am waiting for the next plan to emerge. I mean, I talked about this idea of uh, nurturing the idea of digital nomads, but it's it's in its nascent state right now.
Yeah.
So if people want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I will certainly announce what I do next there.
Great. Just super. Well, anything that Jordan and I talked about, or we're going to be in the show notes. I'm pretty sure, I'm not absolutely sure, but I'm pretty sure this interview will come out, Jordan, as not just a podcast. It may come out as an article for Ever Widening Circles. We are switching to a new publishing schedule where Wednesdays are going to be an article written about the interviews that I'm doing on the podcast. We're in the top 25% of podcasts in the world now quite quickly. Yeah, I really psyched.
Congratulations.
Yes. And if people want to help us get to the next level, our sites are not that far. We're pretty close to being in the top 10%. If people will go and rate and review the podcast, that'll get us up there faster because, of course, it gets pushed out all over by the podcast companies faster. So thank you so much for being here. You can find anything Jordan and I talked about in the show notes below, which will be also part of the Ever Widening Circles articles if you go there to find this interview. Please remember that Ever Widening Circles is there for you. In these hard times where all we hear is the negative news and the I don't know, division and chaos on social media, remember that is not who we are. We are doers and givers and helpers, like Jordan and I started out talking about. Most of the good people in the world want a better world for each other and their families, and they're working towards that in some way, large and small. So thank you for joining us, and I hope all these connections to goodness and progress will carry you through your week, and you'll start finding all the wonder and delight that Jordan and I were talking about. Have a great day.
Thank you.